Yeah, Chair, I was trying to unmute it, but it wasn't letting me, but it is now, so thank you.
That's grand. Okay. Just indicate if you need in on anything as normal.
It'll be fine.
Okay. Welcome members to the 14th meeting of the Public Accounts Committee. Can I advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. However, there could be a slight delay in moving to any private session or back into a public session, so please be patient. Can I also advise that those in the public gallery are welcome to use mobile phone devices as long as they are on airplane mode and devices are muted. You can also use the Assembly Wi-Fi. The rules are in the gallery. It is not permitted to take photographs or record any of the proceedings of today's meeting. Okay, members, apologies. Can I advise members that I have received apologies from Cathal Boylan, MLA, Thomas Buchanan, MLA, and John Stewart, MLA. Can I refer members to the pack for a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting of the 6th of June at page 8 of your pack, and seek agreement, and members consider them for those minutes?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. There are no matters arising, members. Can I ask members if they have any relevant declaration of interest to declare?
Nope.
Okay. Okay, members, can I inform you page 25 of your packs as correspondence dated the 7th of June from Michael Cairns, Acting Head of Communications, providing advice on joining committee meetings via Zoom. It's been printed out and provided for you kindly by the Clerk's Office. Can I ask members if they're content to note the correspondence?
It is. Okay.
Members, at page 26 is correspondence dated the 6th of June 2024 from Mary Ellen Nutt, Head of IT, advising of an extension to the deadline for completion of the Constituency Office survey. Again, printed and provided. Is members content to note the correspondence?
Content, thank you.
Also, members, at page 4 of the table pack is correspondence dated the 12th of June from the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People. Can I ask members if they're content to note this correspondence? And also, can I ask if you're content to include the correspondence in the report as evidence submitted to the inquiry? Agreed?
Yep. Agreed.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Members, we are now going into closed session to receive a preparatory briefing ahead of the commencement of the evidence session on the Memorandum of Reply on Planning in Northern Ireland.
Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Committee Room 21. Signed. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound. 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 Committee Room 21. Sound.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, we're now moving on to the MOR on planning in Northern Ireland, the departmental briefing. And we have a number of witnesses for this session. Open that one, don't you?
Around, yeah, swap it around.
That's okay. I need help on either side. Is it okay if I switch the bit?
Yeah.
Sorry, just.
They're still
Okay, thank you, everyone. You're very welcome, Dennis. Dennis McMahon, Counting Officer for the Department for Infrastructure, Alistair Beggs, Director for Department of Infrastructure, and Julie Thornton, Deputy Secretary for the Department for Infrastructure. You're all very welcome. It's an important session for the committee. I'll just outline a few details shortly. I think at this early point I'll declare an interest as someone who's engaged widely in relation to planning matters over the last number of years, just to ensure that that's on the record. David?
Can I also declare an interest in somebody who engages and previously engages and director of a company building?
On engagement in the consistency role with planning?
I think it's safe to say that all members will have a conflict there. It's what we do in representing our public. Okay, you're all very welcome. Mr. McMahon, you're very welcome to the committee. We've called you back today as the committee was not satisfied with the responses to the MOR, which did not sufficiently address the substance of the recommendations that were laid out in a previous report. Whilst there's a lot of information We did not think that there was enough detail on actual timescales and progress against the recommendations to assess whether the recommendations have or will be implemented. I hope we can get some clarification around this today, and I think it's important to note just at this point we do appreciate the further information that we have received and has provided clarification on a number of areas, but the committee will still rightly have questions as to why there's been so much delay. The responses do not indicate whether performance has improved, which is of concern, and indeed some of the latest statistics publicly available indicate that in some cases performance has deteriorated. This is a very concerning matter for this committee, as we're nearly 10 years on from the planning system operating in this way. Members will want to explore a number of areas that have been touched on, and I want to open up the floor as relevant as we move along. Also, just to point out that when the committee issued its report, it expressed significant concern regarding the absence of joined up working across the planning system, the silo mentality that seems to be happening in all departments. Secondly, the committee was also concerned at the lack of leadership shown by the department in respect of the planning system. And this approach does not give us any confidence that things really have changed much. So I hope today that you can give us some reassurance that we are wrong, but we do have some concern in relation to the delay of any implementation of the actions given the 2 years have passed from the report. So you are very welcome. We do look forward to what you have to say today, and we appreciate you taking our questions as well. But as I've indicated at a previous MOR session last week, we are sending a very clear signal to all departments that when we write seeking clarification or updates, that we expect them to be very clear, and we expect to see actions taken following the recommendations of those reports. So it's not simply about your department in isolation. We're not happy with a few in relation to how they've responded or not responded to various reports. Okay, so you're very welcome, and the floor is yours. Today we have a very busy agenda, so if we could get straight to some of the key areas, that'd be very much appreciated, Mr. McGrath.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to make a very small number of points, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine.
To thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee. Now, I know people say that when they come to committees. I'm not sure we always mean it necessarily, but I have to say I think that this is a really valuable discussion to have. It's a really good time, and hopefully we'll give you a sense of that there are changes happening, and that's certainly the evidence I have, the evidence I've seen and heard directly from people is that a lot of the things that you're looking for are happening, and we need to maybe just clarify what they are and how it works. You've already introduced Julie. Just to say, Julie Thompson's the senior responsible owner, and Alistair's our chief planner. So these are the people who will really be able to, when I say something wrong or need a nudge, they will do it. I just want to pay tribute to colleagues in the department and across local government who do undertake a hugely challenging role. Decisions are often controversial, but it's hugely important that we get them right, and that's, so a lot of the time we focus on the timeliness, absolutely right, but we also need to look at the quality of decisions and how they're taken. And it would be remiss of me to not to mention Catherine McFerrin couldn't be here today, but Catherine is a really key person who's been doing some great work in this area as well. The committee will recognise that we have a two-tier planning system here, and that the system was developed to bring decisions as close to people as possible and to local areas as possible. And this is a huge challenge. Now, I'm not saying that actually from the point, just so you know, that I'm saying it's important to set this in context. But I'm not saying it from the point of view that that's a reason for us to say these are our pieces and these are local government's pieces. But it's important to have that clarity, but it is also important that the system works as a whole. And I think my colleagues have been working hard to get to a point where we're given that system leadership that the committee has said it wants and needs. Having said that, we do need to recognise that councils are sovereign, independent organisations with their own people, finance and governance systems. So this will not be, and this current system does not lend itself to command and control. So we just need to find the right way to pull the right levers to get the best response. And as you've rightly said, a lot of that is to do with collaboration. So we are working very closely and jointly with local government. and other stakeholders, I was going to say shareholders, but stakeholders, to make the planning system better. And even as recently as yesterday, we had a meeting with our colleagues at the Independent Commission. So those sort of forums are helping an awful lot. So I hope today we can demonstrate progress. We're not going to sugarcoat it. If there are things that we do have concerns about, or we think, you know, that we maybe need to do something differently, or we need to think differently, or indeed if we learn something today that pushes us in a different direction, very, very open to that, because that's the value of these sorts of discussions. So thank you very much, Chair, for giving me that chance.
Appreciate the opening remarks. You'll be pleased to know we're all off sugar, so we're happy that you're not going to sugarcoat anything. And we would like you to be as direct and as honest with us as humanly possible, because the importance of the function of this committee is to highlight where the problems exist and how we can move towards resolving them in the interest of our public. So that is appreciated, and I thank you for that. We'll go straight to questions, if okay. The recommendation made by the committee. Recommendation 1. The recommendation made by the committee was quite clear that a fundamental review of the planning system should be undertaken by the Commission. This seems to not have happened. The department said the recommendation has been implemented, but it hasn't. Why is that?
So we have taken it, we took the view, and consciously took the view, that it had been implemented, but very happy to have the discussion about on what basis we did that, and on what basis you think, you know. So what do we not have? We do not have a big review report with a lot of recommendations. We have not put out anything for consultation. What we have is a programme. So the programme is as set out in the MOR, but also the PEP programme. Now the PEP programme was in place prior to the Independent Commission being set up, and I have to say, just to say, we, you know, and I can say this honestly because I wasn't there at the time, but the people went ahead without ministers and set that up, and it was the right thing to do. So that they looked at all of the targets. They didn't start with a blank sheet of paper and said, if we were taking this system apart, what would we do with it? But what they did do was they looked at the work we were doing. They've commented on it. They've given us steers. They're still doing that. That process will continue, but they have looked over the whole programme. So the decision was taken to report to the committee that a fundamental review of our entire programme had been done, but it isn't. If you're looking for a review report, or if you feel it's something different, or if it's something more fundamental in terms of actual policy, we haven't done that. It probably would be fair to say, just going by, and you'll be aware of this from comments that our minister has made, minister's keen that we make the system that we have work. So I'm not sure we'd necessarily, if we were today going to be asking for a fundamental review, that our minister would necessarily support that. Just again being straight about it. So you know, wouldn't want for 1 second to give the wrong impression to this committee or anybody else about what we have done and what we haven't done, and I appreciate the opportunity to clarify it.
Yeah, as pointed out in some of my opening remarks, we're 10 years down the line, and there's considerable concerns in relation to what has or has not been achieved with the planning system, and certainly 2 years since the report, as I've outlined, and we don't see any real shift or progress in that regard.
Well, I think I wouldn't want to again. I'm not going to pretend it's all perfect, but what I would say is that if you take a look, for example, at major applications, there's been a serious reduction in the number of weeks it takes. We're still not in line with our targets, but there has been a serious reduction in the time that it takes. If you have a look at the sort of things that are in all our programmes, there's an awful lot has been achieved. There's policies been reviewed, looked at. There's a whole lot of guidance that's been reviewed and looked at on different arrangements, call-in arrangements and so on. There's been a huge amount of work around. There's a couple of very specific pieces of legislation, and we'll be talking about when we get to some of the other targets that are actually being developed and well down the route in terms of being developed. And I would say the culture is definitely changing. And again, I can see that because I've never directly been involved in the planning service in a previous life, but I've been in departments where it's been happening. And you can see just a very different approach, the way the councils work with officials. So I just wouldn't want to give them, I suppose what I'm saying is, it's not just to try and say it's all wonderful. What it is to say there is progress being made. There's some signs that progress is leading to improvements, for example, in timeliness of some decisions, but it is not. We're not meeting our targets as yet, and I do think we need to have honest conversations about how we get to the stage where we can meet those targets, and that's going to meet some difficult decisions for us, and we're working through some of those now. So
if I can maybe add into that, I think the putting together of the PIP programme, Planning Improvement Programme, as we call it PIP for short, it was a substantial piece of work. It arose out of the reviews, obviously, by yourselves, by the Audit Office, and our own review of the implementation of the Planning Act. And it was actually a challenge to put that programme together, because the number of recommendations that were being made and the volume, I guess, of activity and actions that we needed to take. But we did that in conjunction with stakeholders and came out with a programme that everybody has bought into. We put some pretty clear governance around that. We have a programme board chaired by myself and by Alison McCulloch from Ananoma, and effectively that is giving a rigour to the actions, where we're at with them, and I think to Dennis's point, the collaboration is absolutely loud and true through those arrangements. We have action owners, we have work stream leads, and they're all collaborating to make the changes happen. Now, it is not perfect, you're absolutely right, and we're still on that journey, but at least, certainly on the major side, you can see a significant 16-week reduction from this time last year. So we're making progress with much more still to be done. And I think the trick is that we don't just get caught up with activity for activity's sake. It's the outcomes that we need to achieve that are really, really important. And as Dennis has also said, it's not just about the timeliness, it's about the quality of those decisions at the same time. So lots to be done, but also lots ongoing to try and make it better.
Well, progress is important, and we're not seeing it to the same level that we had expected, as the first blunt point I would make. And secondly, I have a real issue when I'm told by departments that timescale shouldn't be the priority. Everything runs at a snail pace in this place, and it's entirely unacceptable, particularly when it comes to planning. There's a real concern that multiple applications and the pace in which the planning system moves is far too slow.
Just to say, I wouldn't want to get, and apologies if I've given the impression that I don't think timescales are important. I think they're absolutely important. I just was trying to make the point that quality is also important.
I get the point, but at the centre of all of these recommendations, I think it's important that we wanted to see implementation. That's what we were saying. And in relation to recommendation 1, as I've already pointed out, the department said that the recommendation has been implemented, but it wasn't. So I just need a bit of clarification as to why that was said and why it hasn't happened.
Well, I've given the rationale for the reason we put that down as completed was because there were 2 elements to it. The first was that there was to be an independent commission to be set up.
Yes.
It has been set up. It was set up even without ministers.
Yes.
And the second was that they would do a fundamental review of the system.
Yeah. And on that point, Dennis, just sorry for interrupting because this is important. Are you now saying that because of the new minister in place, that there's a change of direction and that the minister is indicating that there's not a need for a fundamental review?
I think that's a separate point I would be making as well, but I'll come back to that in a second. I think the first question is, why did we answer this? So we answered it on the basis that the IRPC, the Independent Commission, had looked at the programme, had given us views on the programme. They'd met 4 times, 5 times as of yesterday, and therefore that was them looking at our programme and fundamentally looking at it, because we were opening up the whole programme to them and saying, here's what we're doing and here's what we can do. So that was how we did it. Is that a fundamental review? If the view of this committee is it's not a fundamental review, then that's fine. I'm happy to look at that and say we'll revise that position. But that was our position. Our position to start with was that. I'm not going to, if the view is, look, a review must be a written report with, by the Commission, then that's a different matter. Now, the separate issue is around the Minister's statements, where the Minister has said, we haven't asked the Minister about the specific recommendation, because as an accounting officer, typically this is about me coming back and saying, well, this is my view as to how this has been implemented. But there is a separate point, is what I'm saying, is that if we were to start now and say that a different fundamental review is required, which is something that's going to involve years and people, gathering more evidence and looking at the system from scratch and coming up with something that might even end up with something that's not a 2-tier system anymore, I don't think our Minister would be in that space at all.
We've lost 2 years, and there may be a wide range of reasons beyond your control, more political, that was the case. But we have lost 2 years, and 2 years of progress at that, in my opinion, because it would be our view, and in fact it is our view, that not enough progress has been made. We get the process, we understand that there's issues and it's far from perfect, but we want to see clear outcomes. And to be honest, at the minute that's not the case. In terms of the interim commission, what improvements has the interim commission brought about to date?
Well, I suppose the primary piece that the interim commission's brought about has been the involvement and having a forum to bring together different interests. So we've got the CBI, the Chamber of Commerce, we've got people in the room, we've got very clear, we've had a series of discussions. Julie can take us through some of the topic areas, maybe to start with, and I'll come back to it.
So in terms of what, they've obviously been looking at the programme on an ongoing basis, as Dennis has already described. They've had discussions about statutory consultee performance and put us over what we're actually doing with statutory consultees in order to improve the performance, and that was a topic of discussion at one of the meetings. They also had discussion around development management and what councils were doing in the world of development management to review their processes. They've looked at fees across here and obviously compared to other jurisdictions. And as we look forward, they have putting together a work programme for the Minister around understanding what local government is continuing to do in this space. They want to understand comparators against other countries and what learning we can take from that. They're going to look at statutory validation checklists. They're going to look at the Planning Appeals Commission, and they're going to look at performance. And those are just, I guess, a flavour of some of the things that they have putting together their work programme for the next few months. So in terms of, I think to the point that Dennis is describing, it is multifaceted in terms of where people are coming from. So we've got like community places there who are interested in community engagement, and they're very keen on, for example, what we are doing up front and front loading the system. We've then got the business community, we've got environmental people and wanting to understand and represent those interests. So the value of that conversation, which has got richer over time, because everybody's, I guess, more comfortable with each other, they're more comfortable with the programme, and they're able, I guess, to more inform where things are going. So it's moving forward, and there's more they want to do. They've met with the Minister a couple of months ago, and he was very clear about wanting to hear their advice back, and they're committed to doing that for him now he's in place.
And he's keen on specific practical measures. And just on that, it's probably worth saying, I mean, on the first issue that was raised there, statutory consultees, we've had 29, the last full year, we had 29,617 statutory approaches to statutory consultees. Of those, 16,374 were deemed to be statutory consultations, and we've been getting improvements in the level of compliance. Still not there, but we're up to on roads 80% 80% compliance, which was 77% the year before, 63% for rivers, which the year before was 56%, and NI water 96% from 92%. So there has been improvements. Again, I'm not saying that these improvements are going to solve all the problems, but there have been some improvements, and again, the sort of discussions we're having are definitely feeding into that. As well as, I mean, like the discussions I've been at all of them since I arrived, and one of the things I suppose people have been talking about is some of the problems around the portal system. But actually the portal system has been working generally very well. You can tell me otherwise and I'd happily take it, but I've been personally online, I've tried it, I've personally been through the planning process a couple of times in my own life, and I can assure you, for me, it looks an awful lot better than what I was dealing with maybe 10 years ago. So I think that there have definitely been improvements, and you can see that sort of even preparing for this. So some of the discussions, and people have been very happy to step forward and help me to sort of understand what's going on in detail, and you can see that those discussions are informed by the sort of forum that we've got here in the IRPC.
Yeah, I appreciate your responses, but we do want to see tangible evidence of improvement coming forward. You've given a number of examples, and we appreciate that, but the pace of progress is slow, and this is a trend that we're continuing to see. And all of the things that have been outlined, they're fine, but the real problem we're hearing and we're seeing is the frustration with the service user. by the service user, of the whole system. And there's a considerable issue with that because there's such a focus on process and not enough on actual outcome. And I don't see any grit to anything that has been achieved here so far, to be honest. Well,
I think this is where we get into some of the honest conversation, because at the heart of this, if you think about the sort of key points in the process, I mean, there's a performance improvement as part of this, and again, we may come back to that action. But when you look at the key points, I mean, we'll be talking at some point presumably about the PAC. There's a particular challenge around those elements of it in terms of major projects and just the capacity. Then statutory consultees, we've talked about that, has typically been a pinch point in the process because you have a small number of people dealing with a massive number of applications. Another factor is that there's a view, and this is talking to colleagues from other jurisdictions, that one of the things we tend to do, and Alistair might want to comment on this, is we tend to try my colleagues tend to try to, across the councils, try to help people through the process sometimes, and sometimes it'll be quicker and easier to say, actually, at an early stage, no, we're not accepting this application, we need to go back. And this is part of the purpose of the statutory checklist, because it gives people clarity. Because one of the things we're hearing, even for example, is that agents are saying, well, their client may not want them to might not want to pay for a number of different surveys, but they're saying, well, we know full well it won't get through, but what we'll do is we'll stick an application in, and then we'll come back eventually and say, well, you need to do something different. And then before you know it, you go into this process point that you're just exactly the point you're making. So there's a bit of clarity and honesty needs to be had around this. And one of the things I've been really encouraged by is some of the discussions, like particularly there was a discussion yesterday which was really good and wasn't prompted by this. It was actually just it was happening, where people were saying actually there's different views about how this operates in each case, but we could clarify things. It wouldn't necessarily make everybody happy initially, but it might get to a better outcome because you'd have greater clarity, people putting in what they need to put in at the earliest stages, and then getting a quicker answer. But it's not, at the minute, it's not suiting. I mean, I suppose everybody's equally unhappy in a sense, in the sense that our statutory consultees are under huge amounts of pressure, and the numbers are piling up, and it's not helping the numbers, and it's not helping the people on the ground who are applying.
Okay, thank
fair?
you. Yeah, it is fair. Yeah, thank you. In terms of recommendation 2, DFI accepts and claims to have implemented the recommendation. You claim that targets and timeframes have been set. So what targets have been achieved to date, and what tangible evidence do we have that improvements are being realised in that regard?
Well, I suppose this is where we get into the PIP programme, and we could talk maybe about this. 13 of the 40 actions have been completed already. Do you want to maybe talk us through them, Julie?
Yes, whenever we gave the committee the supplementary information as requested last week around the PIP programme, and I guess it covers sort of recommendation 2 and recommendation 3 are both in this place. So we have completed 13 of those actions and told the committee what we have been able to do in the short term. Now, that they range from the governance side of the piece in terms of actually just setting up the work and making sure that that's all in place. It's looking at statutory consultees, and there's been an awful lot of work has been done with them. So for them, we have put in place quarterly and annual statistics. We've done a piece of work around standing advice and guidance that actually, from a council's perspective, they're finding really useful because they're able to lean on that guidance and rather than refer to the statutory consultees. That's a work in progress, and there's much more needing to be done, but there's real shoots that will make a difference to councils moving forward, and they're very keen on it. We've developed a protocol for statutory consultees and councils, which is about how they communicate with each other, and really saying to a council, only consult with that statutory consultee when you need to, and when you're doing so, do that in as clear a manner as possible, so you're being very specific about what you want back, and that similarly from a statutory consultee's side that is the case. We've obviously, just picking a few other examples, we've put in place the planning fees increase, which is also part of your own recommendation number 11. We've done work around record keeping, minute taking, transparency, probity. We've looked at how to streamline the internal call-in process. We've looked at PAD processes, and we've done some work around performance frameworks. Now, they're all, some of them are done, I would suggest, and done, and that work is complete. Others, like the likes of the performance framework, is still ongoing. We still need to put that into practice. And I would completely agree with you. There is absolutely no point in doing the work unless it translates into an outcome on the other side that makes a difference to people. But there's certainly been a big programme that is ongoing, and that there's a substantive amount of work that's been done even in the short time over the last couple of years.
Okay, thank you. Hey, Patrick Delargy, MLA.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking you can hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
Great. So thank you for your answers so far. And my questions relate to recommendation number 4. So my first question is just around at the time of the original inquiry. My understanding from your MOR is that there was no council at that time who had improved plan strategy. So more than 2 years later, we have 4 draft strategies. When then can we expect the final LDPs to be completed and to be published?
Maybe if you have
I can come in there. Yeah, no, thank you for that question. You're right there. At the moment, we have had 4 draft plan strategies adopted, and those councils are all working on their local development plans at the local policy stage. And we would be anticipating those coming, forward to potentially independent examination, sort of 26, 27 is our broad understanding at the moment. So after that takes place, then we would be hopefully starting to see the first full development plans come on track. Obviously, the councils are working at these at the moment. These are their plans, and to a degree, we'll have to wait and see how they come forward through the processes.
Okay, so just to clarify, sorry, 26, 27 is for those 4 councils, or
that we'd be anticipating them coming forward, having things ready by independent ready for independent examination at that point. Obviously, that depends on how they progress things at that stage. We need to, they are their plans, and what I would say at that particular point, we probably have quite a heavy engagement in relation to the strategic plans, because these are looking at more individual sites. Our role in that therefore changes. We would envisage taking more of a back seat and in that particular process.
I think I would just add to that, just to say, I have to say this is probably one of the most challenging elements of where we are, and we have to be straight about that, because I think it's fundamental to the whole process. If the whole system was designed around this idea that local governance and local accountability was the way to go, and I think that's absolutely right, and more importantly, the Minister thinks that's absolutely right, and is very keen on the idea that local representatives make these decisions. But in order to do that, the priorities need to be set out in each area. And I think on the one hand, it's brilliant when they've got to that point, even though it's been a long process. But there's a lot of consultation and engagement in there, and that's a good thing. So that's helpful. I think that the situation, while we're talking about 4 having been formally adopted, there's a number that are not that far away, except for we do have an issue around capacity in terms of independent examination, and that's something we're looking at. But I think that this does come to a real challenge, because if this is where we start to see the two-tier system biting, because the question is, at what point is it right for the department to intervene? And it wouldn't be a decision for me anyway, it would be the Minister ultimately, and in what way would be an appropriate intervention. Now, so far, the intervention has been all about just collaborating and working with people, and I should give people a bit of assurance that in some cases, some of the councils will have existing plans, so it's not as if they're absolutely flying blind without something. But I do think it's an issue for us, and we need to think about, we're doing everything through collaboration, but if we go another year or so and we find ourselves in a position where we've done all the actions we can, but we're not getting the outcome in terms of this, then we'll need to see where that takes us.
Okay, no, and thanks for that, because you've kind of touched on a sub-question that I wanted to ask off that, and it was just around the other councils as well. Where are they at? So obviously before draft stage, where are the others at? And just to clarify, you've clarified already there are 4, but I just would like a wee bit more detail just on where the other councils are at as well, please.
I've got the lines. We've got 11 are, have published preferred options. 7 have published draft IEs. I'm just looking to Alistair to click me because these may be out of date. Do you want to? Have you got the stats in front of you?
Sort of, yeah. At the moment, I say that the 4 are through. We have 6 plan strategies which have been through the independent examination process. We're looking at 2 of those at the moment, and hopefully we'll be able to move those on fairly shortly. There's another draft plan strategy with us, which we're looking at the request to go to IE at the moment, and we're awaiting for basically the draft plan strategies from the remaining councils. And I say we know that there are 4 out there who are actively, having gone through that strategic process, are now into the local policies plan in that. So that's a broad summation for you for that.
No, that's great. That's great to get that detail. What would be the latest then? Obviously, we're looking 26, 27 for those first 4. What council do we expect to be the latest, and what year are we expecting that?
In terms of, is that in relation to preparing the local development plans? Which councils are we still waiting?
So it's basically which councils will be. Well, I mean, if you look at, we can certainly
we can provide details.
On it. Yeah. I mean, there's 4 councils who are probably at the preferred options stage, and that's sort of, if you like, the earliest stage in all of this. So they've all got the preferred options, and then a number of the others have shot on ahead and they've got to the final stages, subject to the independent examination, and that's where we get into some of the issues around PAC. The other PAC. Apologies, clarify that, as in the Planning Appeals Commission. So. We can certainly give you details on the 4 that are outstanding.
Yeah, we can provide details on that. I think that we can clarify that.
We're trying to be collaborative and not get into sort of a public naming and shaming at this stage, and just let people work their way through it, but we're happy to supply that to you.
Okay, that's great. I think it'd be great to get that detail. It just allows us as a committee, I suppose, to have that broader understanding of where the delays are, and I suppose just we've looked at where the delays are and the potential time frame for finishing that. But I suppose my last question is around why would you identify those delays as having happened? So I suppose why are there not more LDPs in place? And I suppose what's the learning from this in terms of how we accelerate this process and ensure that it can be done more quickly in the future?
No, again, thank you for that question. I think it's a very important one. I think there's a number of reasons for the delay, and I think what we're needing to look at now is finding the reasons to solve those delays. But broadly, it was a brand new system, and it's still evolving even after 10 years. What we're finding with every report we receive, with every plan we receive, new things are popping out, which mean that we need to look at and refine certain things. But essentially, at the moment, what we're looking at to try and resolve this is, we've been in discussion with councils as to potential changes in relation to the local development plan regulations. I think there's a general feeling there that, things like there's too many consultation bodies, consultation periods can be a bit confusing, and issues around timetabling need to be looked at. We've gone out to them with a detailed questionnaire that they've come back to us with very good and detailed responses towards the end of last year, and we're presently pulling that together for a paper for the Minister, and obviously to present him with an options paper in relation to things. So what we're looking at there is potential public consultation in relation to changes to those regulations, which I think are important, and these are things that we've been picking up as we've been going through the process. And I think what's been very important, we've been talking occasionally about silo working here. We really have been working hard with the councils here. They've been working with us to try and get a coherent position in relation to that. So I think there's progress there, and we need to move it on.
Can I come in there?
Yes.
You've just said a couple of points. Is that all right, Patrick, just if I interject slightly?
Chair, I just have one follow-up question, but work away, yeah.
I'm just conscious that, you know, we're 10 years down the track here and we're still evolving and refining around LDPs.
Yep.
It just seems like the whole thing is a disaster, to be honest. There's no timescales. Is there a timescale?
Again, what we're looking at is, again, a sense of frustration around it. Yep,
Alistair, it's just a straightforward question because this is important overall. There's 11 councils in Northern Ireland. Is there a timescale for the completion of the LDPs?
The councils have given us timescales, but the question is whether they're enforceable. How does that?
So it could be a never-ending story.
To a degree, I suppose these are the council's plans. It's for them to come forward, and we do have timetables, but those are really there to assist us.
How far out away from the timetables?
I would need to look at that. Basically, the timetables are changing. Basically, they're changing all the time.
So we're getting
it's back to that point.
Sorry. I think to get to the point, that's the point here. And I suppose the question is, this is where it comes back to intervention, and this is where it does come to the two-tier system, because these are led by the councils, they're delivered by the councils, they represent the councils' local views. They do give us timetables. The question is, if that, as you say, if that keeps going on, where does that leave us? And there's a point, if we were to intervene, at what stage does this become a one-tier system as opposed to a two-tier system? And I'm not saying it's automatically the first intervention equals a one-tier system. What I am saying, though, is if councils aren't able to do this themselves, then where's the local input to local decisions around this? So it's just a challenge. I'm not saying that to make an excuse. I'm just being very straight about where we are.
After 10 years, with the greatest respect, it sounds like an excuse. At what point do we recognise that there's a serious issue here? 10 years down the line, no clear targets in place. Councils had these powers given to them when the new super councils were created. Were they just told, get on with an LDP, no target required, come back to this in 20 years? Where's the timescale for the completion of these LDPs?
The legislation doesn't set out a timescale
There's an issue.
In relation to that. So we are in their hands. Some of the councils will have existing plans in place, therefore, which are relatively up to date, so they may wish to move at a different speed. A number of them certainly came out of the blocks quite quickly. So that's why I think we now have, the 6 through independent examination and 4 adopted. But to a degree, in the two-tier system, it's the local democracy. It's for the councils to decide when to bring forward their plans. Our job is to facilitate them as quickly as we can, getting those through.
Padraig?
Just a final point on that. I suppose it's been really useful because you've identified, I suppose, some of the trends there as well. And obviously, each council are going to have unique trends and issues which delay the process. But I'm just keen to hear, are there any kind of broad trends which you've identified? Because, for me, looking at this, there's 4 councils that have completed the process. So there's obviously something that's preventing the others from completing it. So I'm just wondering, are there any broad trends in this as well, other than the specifics council by council?
Again, in terms of broad trends, I think each council will need to speak for themselves, but I think this is a resource-intensive process. So obviously, we're aware anecdotally that there are some local plan teams have had resource implications. But again, I suppose it's back to that point that some of them may feel that they have a plan in place which is relatively up to date in relation to that. And again, we're not party to the internal discussions in the council to identify why they might be later in coming along rather than others.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's been really useful. Thanks very much.
Does the Department have oversight then? What is the power of the Department in relation to these LDPs? Oversight? We
have got oversight. There are a range of mechanisms of oversight, and they're set out obviously in the legislation. But I mean, this is about setting. They come to us and set the part of the legislation sets out how the LDPs are supposed to be developed, And the idea is that we approve the timescales, but then the problem is, if those timescales are breached, it's not clear exactly what sort of interventions would be available.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we do have intervention powers, but really we have two roles in the process. We're a consultee to the councils in relation to regional policy, and the second bit is in our oversight role is to, when the plans come before us, the request comes from the council for us to, can this now be sent to independent examination in front of the Planning Appeals Commission? We have a role there. When we receive the report back from the Commission, then our role is to review that and then to direct adoption. There are other things in there, but I think, as Dennis has indicated, if you're looking at powers to actually intervene, to change things or to move things on, that would need to be very carefully considered.
At what point? Council mandate is 4 years. This means that we're 2.5 mandates on from this process started. Is there a recognition within the department that this process isn't working?
I would say that, like everybody else, we would prefer this process to be done much more quickly than it has. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
There's much that I'd prefer to happen. That's what I'm asking. I'm asking, at what point is the department going to recognise there's a very serious problem here that is actually causing considerable issues on the ground in each of the council areas, because they're working off old and outdated plans that are no longer relevant today, that are causing issues for all sorts of reasons in the local area. We're 2.5 mandates into this process starting at council. At what point do senior officials within this department recognise that there's a serious issue and you just need to do something about it?
Well, I think there's two separate questions there. At what point do we recognise that there's a serious issue? Well, of course we recognise that there's a serious issue, and we've not hidden that at all. The question is, what are we doing about it, and what can we do about it? And the point is that is cutting directly across. If we get into areas, this is political. This is very much getting into political space, because councils are sovereign bodies. They take their decisions based on their local representatives, and if we start, certainly as officials, starting to cut across what councils do, then there'll be serious questions that will be asked about why, particularly when we didn't administer it, why would we be intervening in that? I think then there is a question politically for the Assembly, for the ministers, for the executive to think about whether they want to strengthen those powers for the department to step in and look at other. And there's also a question for the minister as to how much he would wish to do. The minister's view is he respects local democracy and he wants to see these decisions taken locally. So there is a fundamental tension there between, on the one hand, local decision making by locally elected representatives, or, with respect to people like myself, bureaucrats deciding that they haven't met the timetable that we would like them to have. And that's,
what was the timetable?
Well, they've actually given us a series of timetables, and the point that Alistair's been making is that the timetables have been rolling, that they've been extending. It's not that the timetables, the original timetable, I don't know if you could say what the original timetable was.
No, I think it might be useful to the committee if they knew what the existing timetables from the councils was, and again I think we can apply that, but it is very much a case of they can evolve, and I know that the constant, it's one of the things, the processes around changing the timetables is one thing which can be disappointing to the councils, and that's one of the things that we want to look at to help them improve that, speeding up.
I just get the sense we're not going to see progress in this anytime soon. Colin?
Yeah, just given the central importance of this for any and every council, what's your own assessment of why it's taken so long to bring them forward?
Again, going back to maybe some things that I've mentioned earlier, I think while we keep saying this is, we're 10 years on, we wanted to be much farther on from where we are. But again, it was new. It was a completely new system. Again, you have, I think, to appreciate that all of the planning authorities, including ourselves, had to get our heads around that. And in terms of the front loading of the system, it was quite difficult. And certainly that's something that the resourcing of that has not always been easy, I think, for councils. Again, it's also something that's coming on. again, as it's been new, every time you come to a part of the system, you're learning a new thing. Something comes out of the word work which you need to address and identify. We've been doing our best to do those. But what's important for us now, I think, is to concentrate on looking at the advice that we're giving out as a department at the various stages, see what we've learned from and what advice that we can then give through those documents to try and say, this is what to do to avoid such and such, or we've seen it.
I mean, just maybe Tad, just to summarise, maybe, I mean, it strikes me, and again, just maybe coming out from a slightly less informed point of view, but from what I'm seeing, is there's an issue about resourcing. The councils, again, we'll come back to that. Different councils will have made about points about resources. Can I judge whether that's correct or not? Well, I don't go in and audit them personally. That's not. There's an issue about the fact that this is a complex process. And in particular, it's a complex process because there's so much case law around this that what we do not want to do is to have a situation where one of these plans is put together and actually ends up falling at the first hurdle because somebody takes it to judicial review because it isn't sound, as the language is.
So therefore, do you think that it's understandable that it's taken so long, or do you think it should have been done before now?
Well, I think I couldn't honestly. I think it would be unfair for me to criticise individual councils based on it. I'm not able to step into their shoes and say specifically why they've ended up in the place they're in. Should it be in place? Absolutely needs to be in place. I would say I've no question about that. Can I honestly sit here blame councils? Because, by the way, we all have our own challenges. We have our own challenges about resourcing in the department as well, and for people who are dealing with other elements of the department, you'll realise that. But I do think that there's no question it just needs to happen. We need to find a way through this. And actually, to be honest, that's why I said at the start I welcome this conversation, because if there are other levers that we can use, so for example, one of the things that comes out of this is highlights the issue again, which is always a good thing. And we look to see, can we redouble our efforts with the councils that are there, that are not as far on as they could be, and see whether this has affected it. But ultimately, again, there's a key point about councils being sovereign and having their own decision.
I appreciate that. I understand that there is a concern in relation to it, but I'm sure you understand ours. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had with the Minister in relation to this, and there needs to be some action taken, to be honest. Diane, Cheryl, and then David, very briefly.
Thank you. And it's just oversight versus enforceability powers. Oversight, if something going wrong without acting or correcting it, is not going to lead to any improvements. And you talked about no power of enforcement. Do you think that the time has come that you as officials should be strongly recommending to the Minister that the legislation is reviewed to bring in enforceability powers? And would you also agree with me, because as I'm listening to this, it's very unfair on residents across Northern Ireland who live in council areas that are performing worse than others, that there's actually not a fair access to planning system, and it's a very significant equality issue. And I would believe, and I'd ask, would you consider that being an equality issue to be recommending urgent action by the Minister?
I mean, I think there's a couple of really important points in there. There is a point about the system that's been set up has variation built into it. We cannot have a situation with local democracy built into it and not have variation. That's part of what it's for. But there is something about how we make sure that the bottom standard is, that everybody has at least the same standard. So I think that's perfectly reasonable. I think there's a fine line between, on the one hand, where we are recommending, recommending elements to the Minister where we think, or recommending different actions to the Minister where they fit within the programme that we've set out here, and we think that they can help. But I couldn't imagine, and I'm not saying for 1 second, by the way, that you're suggesting this, but were we to go and say, right, actually, Minister, this two-tier system really isn't working, we'd like something that's more directive, I think that would be problematic on a whole range of areas. First of all, it wouldn't be objective and impartial, so we couldn't do that to start with. It's not for us to say that the Assembly's made the right or wrong decision around this. I think it's also, personally, I think on an efficacy level, I think it would be too early to say that. I know that this system, you're quite rightly highlighting the problems that are there. We talked to colleagues in other jurisdictions.
Sorry, excuse me.
Yes, sorry, go
I
ahead,
don't really
please.
think this is necessarily as political of an issue as you're making it out to be, assembly versus local councils. I feel like this is an operationally ineffective system where you've got people living in some council areas in Northern Ireland that are not getting the same quality of service in terms of their planning applications, and part of that is because some councils are further on than others and nobody's policing that. There's no enforceability. So I believe that it's an operational thing. It's not a political assembly versus council issue, and I'm just asking, would you consider taking that on board to recommend to the Minister that this is an equality issue here?
It's a fair question. I think, Julie, you want to come in?
So I guess in terms of the process points and the operational side of what you're talking about there, that's where the planning improvement programme is very much aimed at getting everybody into a level playing field. The likes of the statutory validation checklist, which is a core recommendation that was made by the PAC, about ensuring we get everybody getting quality applications in that can be looked at quickly by case officers, moved through the process to the statutory consultees quickly and then back out for decision quickly. You're absolutely right, the performance is variable. And one of the things equally around that is to say, well, what's the lessons learnt around that? Where's the sharing of best practice? And that's where the likes of the Independent Planning Commission is going to be looking at that particular issue, and the councils have already been doing so. So what I can see in the role that I've had is that collaboration is growing. They're looking at, a lot of them have done reviews within their own, some of them by external consultants and some internally, and aimed, I think, at the very point that you're making. The performance is not good enough in certain areas. How do we improve it? And so we know that, for example, some of them put in statutory validation checklists already in an administrative basis. They haven't waited for the legislation. Schemes of delegation also are significant in terms of what happens and the ability to move things through a council process quickly. And the collective learning and the bringing of the heads of planning and indeed Solace at chief exec level to ensure that they are learning from each other and actually putting that best practice in. It's made a difference on the majors. The 16-week improvement in the last year, that's a significant improvement, down to 44 weeks, not at 30 weeks, but 16 weeks better than what it was. The locals, unfortunately, in some councils are not where they need to be, and that our conversation with them is to say, well, if it can work in one council, then why can it not work in another? And all the PIP programme effectively isn't trying to ensure that statutory consultees are doing what they need to do, applicants are doing what they need to do, and the council officers are doing what they need to do. And it's very process driven in what you're describing.
Okay, Cheryl,
Thank
very
you,
briefly.
Very briefly, you'd mentioned about the importance of local councils and local members making the decision. I suppose what I'm looking at, what is your assessment then across the board in terms of training for local members? Do you see the training equal across Northern Ireland, or do you see some councils doing this far better? And my concern with that is if some councils members are trained, they're more informed, it's more effective and continuous, then again there's an equality issue right across Northern Ireland if that training isn't sustainable and standardised.
I think there is a lot of training coming on. I mean, we can talk about the specifics, the variability within that, but we've got some really good returns in from councils saying, look, this is what we're doing. They're training all their members. Some of them are taking some of their members out, for example, to look at decisions that have been made previously. We've also given them guidance, particularly there's some sensitive areas where we've given them guidance to say, look, actually you need to, before you take a decision, you need to make sure that you've got the rationale down. You need to make sure that it's properly recorded. And again, there's evidence that that's happening. I mean, there is evidence that a lot of these things are happening across councils. Could I sit here and tell you every single council is reaching the highest standard? No, I couldn't. But I could tell you that every council is aware of what they need to do, and they're all doing the basics around it.
Sorry.
We're straying.
Okay, I'll leave on that one. Come back.
Okay, David.
Hi, thank you guys for coming in. Dennis, listen, I want to look at recommendation 5 just quickly on transparency. So, in your oversight role for the planning system, what have you done to improve the transparency of decision making in the department, both in the department and at councils?
Well, this is around good record keeping and making sure that we're open and transparent about the rationale. And I touched on it in the last answer about how we're doing a lot around making sure that councils are aware of the case law, of the challenges around not and the fact that they could be challenged if they don't take decisions in an open and transparent way. In the department, we've had file management protocols. We've making sure the portal has actually helped us greatly and helped the councils as well greatly in that, and a number of the councils have come back to us to say actually they're using this as a way of keeping records in a more secure but also a more open and transparent way. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, I think you pretty much covered that, Dennis. But again, in the department, we have a file management protocol, which is not only very useful stuff for our existing staff, but for training staff coming in so that they know what should be public, where it should be, what is kept off the system, but there for accountability purposes in relation to court cases, FOI and stuff like that. So it's given us a very good degree of consistency in relation to that, and we've developed that with our own our internal audit colleagues. And again, it's how you review that. Again, that's something I will be keeping an eye on, and where we need to, we would always be looking back to our internal audit colleagues to say, now's time to have a look at us. But yeah, it's been very fruitful for us, I think, in terms of staff confidence.
Okay, I'll bring it down practical to the grassroots level, because that is that the timelines that are quoted are absolute nonsense and practical happens of what happens on the ground and what we deal with on a weekly basis. A 20-week for a local is false. A 30-week is ridiculous. We're dealing with applications in 2020, 2021, 2022. There isn't. I actually couldn't name more than one application that I've dealt with that is within that time. And what happens on the ground is the officer puts it out at last minute to add another consultation in or ask me for another drawing. And at that point, whenever that consultation comes back, then the timeline starts. So your timeline are false to start with. And the transparency, as people look at that, have no confidence in at all. So the timeline starts at the point where they get the final consultation in, and repeatedly applications have a final consultation. So then whenever a timeline comes, it looks like the application was done in 20 weeks, when in reality it's been in the system for 4 years or 3 years. So the timeline's false. The portal you've named is impossible to search and find anything on. Absolutely impossible. So if you know your case reference, yeah, it's dead easy. But if I'm searching for something, and we're talking about transparency, if I'm searching for something, I can find nothing on that system, because the addresses that go in aren't so it'll be next to. So if I'm looking for, 4 Lisburn Road, Belfast, it'll be beside 6 Lennon Street, or they're not named. So whenever you go to find, the map search doesn't work unless you know exactly the area that you're looking for. So the transparency on both of those just doesn't exist, and I would suggest there's very little change at all as happened from any of this.
Okay, so I think 2 separate issues there on the statistics and how those are recorded. I mean, those are official statistics, so actually I'd want to understand what you're describing there, because they're done by our statisticians within the department, and they are national statistics. So if there's something.
Saying that, one thing just to say, one thing when I heard that, I was thinking you're absolutely right about the variation. So for example, if the average, for example, is, I mean, we're already exceeding our average, but actually between councils, there's averages that range from 10 weeks to 400, I think it is. So I'm not saying for 1 second that the statistics aren't showing that. They're showing that level of variation, but it may be that what you're saying is, look, the average.
I've never seen an application in it.
Yeah, so that's it. But that, to be fair, though, I mean, sorry, I just asked the question. I mean, to be fair, would you be presented with something that was necessarily working, or would people come to you if by the time people come to you, they're obviously unhappy.
Both. I get people coming to me when they apply, and I get people coming to me whenever they're stuck in a system. Right. I was in officers this week. I was in officers last week. I was this takes up so much time of political guys' time as well as agents. But what is happening is the timeline, and it might be the official, but I personally, that stat of 30 weeks or 20 weeks is completely and utterly not related to reality. There's no reality in any of that. That is official.
It's back to official statistics.
It is, but and it'll be an average, and it's worked out as averages. And obviously, within an average, you're going at the point you're making, you're going to have outliers that are longer than that. But if there's something, I think what I would want to understand is if there's something specific behind that, because it's very, very particular the way that they work those out for transparency purposes, for consistency purposes. And
my point is the consistency isn't there, nor the transparency. So what happens is an application sits for 2 years, it sits on an officer's desk, they go to make they come to a kind of decision, and what they do is they ask for another drawing or they ask for another consultation. And at that point, that's when your figures start.
I think you have raised a really important point. Though I talked about it earlier. There's 29,000 statutory consultations came through in the course of a year to statutory consultees. 16,000 of those were actually deemed as statutory consultations. Now that's not to say the others were not worthwhile doing, but the experience of statutory consultees is a lot coming to us. And sometimes that's a confidence issue. Sometimes it's a case of people saying, well, you know, I need to. So whatever it is, that's an issue. I'm saying that's part of one of the things that you're touching on, because we're getting all these statutory consultations requests coming in, and it's not necessarily helping. Yeah. And it's certainly not helping our consultees.
And I think there's a distinction, maybe just in picking that up, between the time frame of statutory consultee, which absolutely does reset every time they are asked. That bit resets, but the 20 weeks or the 30 weeks is from the start of the process to the very end of the process, because that's the way that's actually calculated. So it does depend which bit you're describing.
Yeah. I'll pick up just one more, because I know we're pressed for time and we're quickly going. Major applications, that's the if you look at major applications come through and there's a complete lack of transparency. They come right through the system. Recently we had DFI applying to DFI and the council, and then DFI deciding they're going to review the decision. So at the point at the end, then there's another layer of, so there's a Sprucefield, Moira train station, Knockmore Link Road, all three in my area. Then the department then come afterwards to go, no, we're going to review and we're going to. So that adds, you know. So I see you get my frustration.
Okay. Thank you, David. Yeah. Colin.
Yep. So recommendation 6 then calls for suitable and proportionate means of engaging with the planning system. And engaging with the system is clearly vital for community buy-in and to voice their views on transparency and all of that. I know the department, there are proposals, I think, with the department to increase online digital methods for the pre-application process. But it is noted that within the response in recommendation 6, it states that the department were not persuaded of the need to amend current provisions for appeals. So that would imply that the department are content with the level of engagement and see no merit in exploring this. Is that the position?
I don't know if you
can come into that. Touch on this. No, obviously the issue of third-party appeals is something that is always very topical, and I think it is always going to be with us.
Sorry, I'm going to come on to third-party appeals. I'm talking about, it says not persuaded of the need to amend current provisions for appeals. Is that other than third-party appeals?
Mm-hmm. Certainly the Minister has indicated that what he's looking at is the PIT programme and seeing how that can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the planning system overall, because it is geared towards getting people involved at the first point. So at the moment, he has no current plans to look at third-party rights of appeal. But clearly, obviously, that's something that, as we're going through, things will evolve, and something that we'll need to keep an eye on. But at the moment, it's.
Well, I'm a bit confused, because I thought that it notes that the Minister will consider third-party appeals within the planning system.
I think since the MOR has come out, the Minister has reflected further on that one, and at the moment he has no current plans.
So he's responded to the House maybe a week or two ago to say that he has no current plans to introduce it.
Okay, so and then so there is no current exploration of that taking place.
No further development of that. No.
Okay, David?
Looking at recommendation 7 then, it says the concerns around the rural development will continue with inconsistencies across the countryside. The committee had asked for a review of the policy in this area, but the response highlights a call for evidence 2 years after the recommendation was made, and one on climate change. There's been no revised policy in this really important area. Why have you not addressed the recommendation in your responsibility as regional planning or for regional planning policy?
I suppose the major policy framework around this is the SPPS, and where we have had a call for evidence, as you've noticed, and I suppose you noted. And I suppose the idea behind that was to look at a number of issues, one of which was the development, and including rural development. So that I think we've got 59 responses to that.
59.
We're working through at the moment, and not necessarily clear views coming out around this. That there are different views about rural development, but this is something. But that is our fundamental policy vehicle, and that's what the minister will be looking at when we've
I think it's an important note just to add to what you've been saying there, Dennis, is that the SPPS is there to set out the policy hooks, the broad policy thrust, which is then going to be taken by the councils in developing their local development plans. And obviously, those plans will introduce their own policy specific to each particular area. And again, as Dennis has noted, we had about 59 responses to the call for evidence. We're still going through those at the moment, and in terms of development in the countryside, there's no obvious clear call from what we're reading at the moment that the strategic policy is wrong in terms of its clustering, consolidate and grouping of development thrust in the countryside. So, but again, we'll need to review that and obviously report this to the Minister in due course to identify where we go forward in terms of policy development.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about LDPs. In my area in Lagan Valley, I have 2 council areas, and we have 2 different policies, and we have 2 different interpretations of the policies for the countryside. So how does that build trust or confidence to anybody in the...
I suppose that this comes back is, that the Assembly decided there shall be a 2-tier planning system with 11 councils and ourselves as a 12th planning authority. And at that point, the powers have been given to the councils. It's, having come from somewhere from a 2-tier background in terms of my training and so on, you do get variations of policy building up between councils. The issue for us is...
should say in a different jurisdiction.
In a different jurisdiction, I should, yes, hence my accent. And but what we're looking at is, in terms of policy, when a plan is coming into us, we're looking at it with the regional prism, and it will go through an independent examination. And if there's a divergence of policy and things and so on for each area, that's independently examined at that point. And so, this is a system that we have. And I appreciate this, if you've come from a single tier system, which this was for so many years, the change to a 2-tier system, that is quite a jump. And, you can sense occasionally people are wondering, why is that like that in that place and like that in the adjoining council? This, I suppose, is the nature of local democracy.
The policy remains, but it's the interpretation is interpreted differently in what it looks like on the ground. So again, this comes down to confidence and comes down to performance of planning. So if I live in one street, on one side of the road, in one council area, the interpretation is different on the same policy than on the other side of the street. And how is that possible? How does that get through the LDP process?
If the same policy, but just to clarify, if it's exactly the same policy in both council areas,
just as an example, very quickly, if you look at an example of infill, Lisburn is interpreted. Lisburn Castlereagh have to give the full time.
David.
Yeah.
We have to stay on.
Okay. No. Yeah, but it's around it. It's exactly
right,
on this. It's exactly on the concerns around rural development. So you've got an interpretation of policy that's different in one side, in one council area and the other, and I'm guessing everybody will be exactly the same when they've got two. But they're putting LDPs through to yourselves, and you're approving different policies in different places. I'm not saying which one's right or which one's wrong. I'm just saying it's different.
Again,
there's a point about consistency widely that has been made. Cheryl.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your answers so far. Basically what I want to touch on is recommendation 8. So the committee, we were very concerned about the absence of leadership shown by the department regarding the planning system. In your response, you highlight that leadership has been demonstrated through the creation of the Planning Improvement Programme, your PIP. Can you advise how this has actually driven culture change, and what changes to the user of the planning system would you see from this?
Well, I think we've talked already about the cultural shift. There's a lot more, lot closer working. I think that there have been some changes. There will be. I mean, some of the changes, for example, that have already happened around statutory validation checklist, or non-statutory yet so far, but they will become statutory. You're seeing councils actually using that. And for example, one of them yesterday was noting the fact that this was a real game changer. It was actually starting to. They could see the impact on the ground. We're making sure, I suppose, in the nicest way, that everybody's aware of what everybody else is doing. So that is pushing people to, and also encouraging people to say, well, if they're doing it here, why can't we do it there? And you are seeing some improvements in actual timescales, albeit not as much as we'd want, and not across all of the metrics. But two of the key metrics, particularly around major applications, and around the issue of statutory consultees, because that holds up so much. I think there's scope for further. I do. We haven't really touched on it today, because I think the key question at the end of all this is, there's one question is about, are we delivering it? The next question is it all effective? If we delivered it all? And I think that's the bit I think we do need to come back to.
Just on what you said there, how are you measuring that? How is that documented? Is there data that is collated to say, look, we have done this and we've moved to this and there's an improvement? Is that all logged? Is it being continually reviewed?
It is.
So you have, I guess, the outcome side of the statistics side of things, whereby absolutely it is logged and publicly shared with people. We're looking then at a performance framework and expansion, because those statistics are relatively narrow in what they're actually giving out, and we want to broaden it to other areas like outcomes and continuous improvement programs and things like that, and that's work that we're well on the way to. On the PIP side of things, and actually the transparency around that, when we're looking at actions, they're written up, they've got closure reports behind them to identify what we have done and have that logged, if you like, as part of the process that we're looking at. And no doubt, I suspect that will be looked at then by internal audit or whatever in due course. So there is the public statistics side of that and the sharing of that information. Then that's obviously been reported within councils as well, so planning committees should be getting sight of all of that. There should be no reason why they wouldn't, and obviously having that conversation within their councils. And then we're also logging the activity side of it as well, to ensure those processes are happening, so all of that's been logged.
And you touched previously on best practice within, obviously, local government. So whenever you see a method of best practice, how is that communicated then throughout the council areas? What is that mechanism that you use to do that?
There's a really one of the good things of this, again, it sounds like bureaucracy, but it's actually really important, is there's a good programme structure, and it has all of the different parties on it. And what you see happening is it's happening formally. So Julie will chair. So I'm saying it's maybe Julie, you can tell because I've seen you chairing it, and you chair it, and you get people coming up with saying, look, this is really working well. Could we try this elsewhere? But quite often you'll hear, well, actually the heads of planning got together last week and we agreed that we'd try this. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is you're just seeing people coming up with these points as they're emerging, where they're saying, actually this worked and we're going to try this here. So you can see, I have seen that. Sorry, Julie, did you want to?
Yeah, and I think for me that's about the difference that you're talking about, because you can put a process in place and almost make the collaboration happen. What I prefer is when people are doing that naturally, and that they're actually engaging with each other and they can see the benefit in doing it, rather than being done through a work stream type of approach. So we've got both going, and if I reflect on how the programme has sort of developed over time, you can see much more of that natural collaboration happening as well as the formal, and I think that's a really positive sign. Shoots of progress, not sorted by all means.
And that it is positive to hear, but it's obviously how that impacts and how that change is impacted on the ground, because we're obviously hearing here there is still massive issues, but that's good, but how do we get that right down to the ground so people are seeing the difference? So I'm going to touch on recommendation 9. So again, the committee were concerned around the poor quality of applications entering the system and only serve to further delay the process. The response does not reflect the committee's view that this should proceed without delay. So can you advise as to how quality has been improved in the period since this committee's report, and provide any data or evidence you have to demonstrate this?
Yeah, so it's a significant recommendation and one we've done quite a bit of work on. I guess I would say a couple of things. In terms of the statutory part of it and working that up and through, there was a substantive discussion on this at the Infrastructure Committee in the middle of May, where we updated them because there's significant interest in this particular one. And we expect to be with the committee with the statutory rule for the return in September. So it's pretty much there, and we're just doing the
DFI committee.
Did I say?
Just said the committee. I thought you said committee.
Okay. Sorry, DFI committee. So yes, in the middle of May. We're working through with councils and statutory consultees to get that finalised, and with the PAC, but it's very nearly there. But I think more to your point, in the meantime, we have now got 4 councils who are doing it administratively without which is significant progress. There was 1 for quite some considerable time, now 4, and another 3 already in development. So we're seeing that people are moving and really ready for this to come in, and are putting it in on their own and within their own councils, and it is viewed as a significant game changer in terms of what it will mean locally. The positive reaction of agents, developers or whatever, because it's encouraging that conversation about what does good look like, and I think making it work locally is going to take work, obviously, for individual councils. We're putting in place regional guidance around it as well to try and do that collaborative piece that you've been talking about, but we are very close to having that in place for the start of September.
I think if we had this together with the statutory consultees, together with the independent examination process, if those 3 elements were improved, there is no doubt that there will be a change on the ground. There will be a major change on the ground.
No, I appreciate that. So recommendation 10 then, the review of the past decisions is included within the department's guidance. The response does not indicate what the department has done to ensure this important process is carried out by all planning authorities. So this obviously is not good enough. So could you advise how you've taken this recommendation forward, given the department's oversight role for the whole planning system?
Well, we've done a detailed examination. I mean, Alistair touched on it earlier, in terms of our own decisions in the department. Obviously, councils are undertaking a similar process, and we've had feedback from them, and maybe Julie might want to touch on that. But that they are doing it, so we're not.
Yeah, and in terms of building on that, we expect the work coming through in the performance framework that I've talked about a couple of times. One aspect of that performance framework is highly likely to be around outcomes. And that will be stipulated as part of the framework, that people are not only recording their processes, but they're also thinking about what outcome are they achieving. Some of the councils we know are going out on site visits. Some of them are using it as part of their annual refresher training. And actually, again, on this particular one, it's viewed as a positive experience, because sometimes planning can be seen as a very negative space with lots of problems and challenges and whatever, and sometimes actually seeing, look what happened on the ground, there's that development actually there, it's working, or picking up lessons learned is viewed as a positive experience that I think is helping everybody. So it's one we really want to build on. It's what we're here for. It's and it's a good reminder that it's not about process, it's about the outcome on the ground.
And again, when do you see that positive benefit truly come to fruition? You know, is there a time scale that you have that this will all kind of come together?
Well, I think in terms of because I think you started it about making it happen and when will it be there. Around that, the performance framework material is nearly finalised, and we want councils to pick that up fairly soon. And that means that as they develop their frameworks, that they are actually all of them thinking about the outcomes now. That will take a bit of time, I suppose, to actually then get people out on the ground and looking at those outcomes. But we would be wanting to put the framework in place to encourage them to do so. And as they have already replied to us, a lot of them are doing it anyway. So we think it's one that will be fairly quick to actually get to happen.
I suppose back to your point about timescales. I mean, this will depend a lot on that performance review. But we've seen an initial draft of that, and I think the councils are discussing it at the moment. The framework, sorry.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Thank you. Diane Forsyth.
Thank you, Chair. And on recommendation 11, so the change in the uplift of planning fees is welcome and was long overdue. But the recommendation asked for all of those involved in planning to work together to make the system financially sustainable. The committee would have expected more joint working to look at the ways to make the planning system more financially sustainable, and I want to ask, why has more action not been taken on this issue?
Well, there's been action, as you noted, in terms of the uplifts and the legislation underpinning that. I think that we've come to a point, I mean, if the objective is to make the system sustainable, the challenge at the moment is making anything sustainable, and we're obviously going through quite a significant reset right across departments and in terms of budgets, and that's a challenging process. At the moment, we've probably gone as far as we can in terms of the actual, putting through the uplifts. The resources to be able to do this are either going to be found from local rates or from a future central funding, but we're not in a position certainly now to be able to commit to funding.
Give be any sort of time scale in terms of working together to review this further?
I mean, we continually work with councils, and I can tell you we continually get tortured about this, as you'd understand, in the nicest possible way.
I think it's a fair comment on reflection of today. The system has a lot of improvements, and until it's performing better and perceived that way, it's hard to adjust fees further, but it's good to know that it's continuously under review.
It's worth saying the Minister has said his view is clearly that the system does need to be funded properly, that we can make the system work with
make it sustainable. Funding. Yeah, absolutely. But it's notable that DFI has asked for more funding for itself when the committee previously expressed surprise at the size of the DFI's planning section. And has the department reviewed the value for money of its own planning function?
So in terms of our planning numbers, they have dropped from where we were previously in terms of telling the committee around that. A lot of the
number of staff have you got now?
Mid-60s.
And what would be the annual cost of that?
Oh, goodness.
We can come back to you with that. Apologies, we'll come back to you with that one.
One worked out.
Just for a ballpark figure,
yes,
and what exactly would they be doing in the department?
So
given
what we've got is I guess a range of functions as you would expect. So we've got casework, people working on casework, regionally significant called in applications. We've got oversight of the LDPs. We've got development of region policy and guidance. We've got the planning improvement programme. We've got considering whether to bring them into call-ins or not. We've got environmental governance. Have I got?
There's the Crumlin Road Jail stuff as well.
Crumlin Road Jail is still counted in that because that's part of our planning system. So it covers the whole gambit, I guess, of the functions that a lot of which we've been describing, to you.
So, given that it is quite a substantial number of staff sitting within the department, given that the frontline services devolved into the councils, would there be a consideration or something there where the department would consider deploying staff into councils? For example, I know in one of my local councils we have an automatic 6-month waiting list because they were down to one key member of staff. They were so short staffed that people had to wait 6 months before they even had a planning case officer allocated, before it was even looked at. Would it be a consideration that one of the 60 staff that's sitting centrally to the department could be considered to actually support those services that way?
I think, to be fair to the planning staff in the department, we also have vacancies as well, and people who are struggling to get their job done, and I guess I think it's back to Dennis's point around the budgets in general. And the position that we're all in financially. We'd love to have more staff, as well as I'm sure councils too, and it is an issue that is raised with us regularly around, and we know that some councils in particular are very challenged. But
it's where sometimes if it was considered crisis point, just to know that there's staff sitting funded centrally, it would be good to take it on board. But just to move on,
the only thing I would say is just not all of those staff, not all those 80 staff are planners. There's support teams, and if we start taking planners out, we're actually, we're already struggling in terms of the actual regional. If you take one of those regional applications, that's like a whole team in its own right, to be honest. I won't name names in terms of them, but they're out there, and they're just a full-time people working on that, huge amounts of documentation. So that's...
Absolutely, no, I appreciate that. And just the final one, recommendation 12, the committee viewed the operation of the planning system as one of the worst examples of silo working that it had come across, and you've indicated the existence of the Interim Regional Commission as addressing this issue. Can you tell me how this has addressed the issue of silo working?
I think there's the commission, and also there's the project management structure that I talked about earlier, because that has representation from all of the organisations. I suppose how has it changed? I can see the change, certainly. I can see the way people work together, and I've touched on that a number of times. I think that the IRPC brings a whole different agenda, because it's bringing in people, so you're getting a sort of not unlike this, you're getting a critical and supportive, approach there. So that brings a different dimension to it. I think all of those things are definitely making a change, and you can see that in the practical outworkings of the things we've talked about, particularly statutory validation checklist is a great example. LDPs, more work to be done, certainly, but at least we've got those sort of conversations. We can have honest conversations, so it's not all sweetness and light.
There's huge opportunity, obviously, Department of Infrastructure in the recent response to flooding, like siloed working was a big kickback from that. We were dealing with Rivers Agency, roads, NI Water, and it was everyone else's problem. And for me, dealing with flood response in Downpatrick in particular, siloed work in the DFI was a huge issue. But I do welcome that in the response to that, it has been something really recognised in DFI because of all the legacy agency bodies, and I just see huge potential here in terms of planning, because really all of these statutory consultees, a lot of them fall within DFI, so it's a really good opportunity.
We bring them together in a statutory consultative forum, which has proved really, really useful. And we've got council, we don't have all 11, but we've got 3 councils represented, all the main statutory consultees involved in that. And it's really, really helped to bring them together and actually to engage, because they're, apart from anything else, then they're listening to each other, because they both can be frustrated at times and there's different issues. But the value of that, and the statutory consultative performance is definitely improving, and even the talk about and discussions we have about consultations, the number of them, I think that you were raising previously, and making sure that there's a consequence of that, because then people are having to divert to re-look at the same application again and again. So I couldn't agree more. The bringing people together and the sense of working together that has come out of the last 2 years, we are in a far, far better place in that sense. There may be more work to do on actual outcomes, but the collaboration is definitely in a better place.
Definitely, and it reduces the time scale, obviously, of it too, if you're all sitting in a room together. Rather than
only thing I wanted to add, and just because I know you'll want to keep it real, but the other side of that is, I'm going to say it, that because we've been very honest about this, I think planning officers, there's a huge issue in terms of just what I've seen, the stress that people have been under. And I'm talking about across the councils, I'm talking about in the department. And, I just see really, really hard-working people. And I'm not saying it's the nature of the job. It's, perm sex, get it, we deserve it. Something maybe that's fair enough. But I do think there are people there who are really doing their work their hardest. And I think... and I'm going to, just to say it in a positive way, I agree. I think there's such an opportunity here. If we could get people into the right mindset where they feel a sense of control, because what happens is if you're getting grief from all corners and you feel you're just losing control, then you just go inward. So I think we can find a way of bringing people out and saying, look, actually you can make some real changes. And some of those stories that we heard earlier, if they could change, and people can realise that would just be fantastic, and I think it would get us into a positive cycle. Definitely can be fixed. That's the positive note.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis and Alistair. We appreciate you taking our questions and answering the concerns that we have, and for being forthright and honest as well with us, which we do appreciate. We do hope to see progress and quite a shift from where we're currently at, and hope that that does indeed happen. And thank you, members, as well. That was a fairly hefty session, so thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you also to the Treasury Officer of Accounts and Controller and Auditor General and the teams for their assistance with this MOR. Members, we're now going into closed session to receive a briefing on the
Committee Room 21. Sound.